Choice Cuts by Rob Smith. What are the duties of a good neighbor? To maintain order in your home, certainly. Keep down the noise, walk the dog with poop bags. Don't allow your lawn clutter to bother other people. Upkeep your home. Have a good fence. Not murder your neighbors. Steve really should have had a good fence. He didn't. That's why Richard Down was able to step onto his lot and take his life away so easily. That and a good spice rub. Knock, knock. The dog barked like crazy, such was its way. Steve booted the dog in the ass and hauled open the door. An old man in a Steelers jersey was standing in his doorway.
"Hello, neighbor. Bad timing?"
Steve was wearing oven mitts on both hands, a messy, smoke-smudged apron tossed haphazardly over his stocky frame. Sweat coursed down his temples, cheeks, and jowls. No, I always dress like this when I'm doing nothing." Steve was too quick to quip, and it sometimes rubbed people the wrong way. Because this was his first time meeting whoever this scruffy old guy was, he decided to tone it down, to make a better first impression. He readjusted his apron and his expression, but if this was a Joe Ho or some other panhandler, he was about to get a good door slamming. Sorry, bud, I'm just out back barbecuing, and I'm more cooked than my burgers. What's up?" The man smiled. He looked like he'd like to extend a hand, but Steve's hand was gloved, and the man's hands were full of a package of something.
"Yeah, neighbor, that's what I wanted to talk to you about. I'm Richard Down. I live at 10 Brownton Street. My backyard and yours are connected. I got a problem, and I was hoping you could help me."
Steve nodded, sweat trickling down the back of his neck and into his eye. He was still waiting for the pitch, starting to itch with irritation.
"I have my in-laws over today, and I got a really good cut of meat to barbecue for them, but the damn barbecue chose today to crap out on me. I can't get it started."
"Did you check the propane?"
"Yup, full. I think it's the computer. Yeah, I know, barbecues have onboard computers now. Anyway, long story short, would it be crazy of me to ask if you could toss this steak on your Barbie for a minute? Then I can slap it on a plate, get my mother-in-law off my back, and I'll fix my queue at a later date."
As the man explained, Steve's gaze drifted to the back patio and to Down's house in the distance. The house on the other side of his backyard was smaller than Steve's by several times. It looked run down, certainly in need of new paint and some accessorization. On Golden Gateway Crescent, bigger and better had been the mantra for homeowners since the early 2000s. Steve's house was currently in the high average price range, between $2.5 and $3 million. He'd done much to modernize it, adding in a fountain in the front, a hot tub, an exercise room in the back, and 2 extra garages. Life had not been so good on the streets adjacent to Golden Gateway, and Brownton was one of them. The street was in a different jurisdiction of Pittsburgh and received a substantially smaller amount of civil funding. Things looked different on that side. The grass was not so green, with rough road surfaces, unkempt sidewalk greenery, and a lack of modernization. So Steve and Mr. Down shared a backyard, did they? There weren't railroad tracks running between their houses, but there might as well have been.
"Well, shit, Rick. Looks like it's one of those days, right?" "Seems to be,"
the older man dithered. Putting your meat on another man's grill was almost intimate, making it an awkward proposition. Plus, Steve didn't like to get too chummy with have-nots. Still, his economic standing aside, a man in need of a barbecue should be accommodated. In fact, the Bible says, in the Book of Grill, it's a sin not to assist others in barbecue-related matters. Steve took off his oven mitt and extended a beefy hand. "I'm Steve. Come in. Let's cook up your steak." Richard Down followed Steve. Richard took his shoes off first and carried them through the hallway. En route to the backyard patio door, they passed through the living room, through the kitchen, through the den, and through his trophy room. As they passed through the kitchen, Steve's wife, Manna, was in there sitting at the island, slippered feet up on a stool, watching Housewives of Beverly Hills. She looked over and waved casually. "Hi," she smiled, and then kept munching her snack, candy popcorn. Old Man Richard smiled back, and looked a little too long before walking through. Steve was used to guys staring at Manna, especially old guys, so he didn't give it much thought. As they walked the long hallway, he noticed a clicking sound had been following them. like the old codger was ticking or something. Steve observed him over his shoulder. He walked with a hitch, to be sure. They arrived at the den, which connected to his room of NFL trophies, and Rick took a wondrous gander, like most guys did. Then Steve popped open the door to the patio, and smoky barbecue aroma flooded in from outside. Steve put his shoes back on, and Rick sat on a stool to do the same. He could see now why the old man's gait was ticking. He had an artificial foot, made of ceramic and plastic. Shoes on, they stepped out into the sunlight. Richard straightened up his posture, marveling at the view of his own house from a different perspective.
"Wow, the grass really is greener,"
he began.
"Beautiful day, lovely house."
Steve reached into a small beer fridge, handed Richard a token Pabst, took one for himself. "Here, old-timer." They cracked their cans, toasted, and drank. Steve could feel his tension slip away once he had a cold beer in his hand. He became friendlier and opened the lid of the barbecue to see how the flame level was. Manna had already brought the burgers inside, so the barbecue stood empty. 3 of 4 burners were quietly hissing flame. "Okay, Richard, no homo, but I'd like to see your meat. What do you got?" Richard stepped forward and presented his wrapped package. No homo. It was a large cut, about the size of a T-bone, but not a cut of meat that Steve recognized. It looked nice enough, though, juicy and marbled, and seasoned with brown powder, small red peppercorns, and green sprigs. "That's nice," Steve admired. "What kind of cut is that?" Richard smiled coyly.
"I can't say."
Not everyone knew the name of what they ate, so Steve shrugged it away. "Looks good enough," he remarked. "How does your mother-in-law take it?"
"Ask my father-in-law,"
Rick quipped back, and then was serious again.
"Medium."
Grinning, Steve slapped the meat on the still-hot rack, spraying the area down with non-stick spray first. As the steak sizzled, Steve did some mental math and wondered, if this guy before me already has gray hair and a limp, how old is he, and how old is his mother-in-law? Ancient, he guessed, and still eating steak. He commented on this to Richard, just to pass the time.
"Yeah, she's old,"
the man conceded.
"Almost 100, but she cusses like a sailor 1/5 her age and could probably outdrink one too."
Steve was no fool, and had encountered all sorts of liars in his relatively short life, but didn't sense any crap coming off Richard. The old guy seemed to be legit. He figured it was safe to continue with other conversation topics. "So, how long have you lived in Brownton?"
"We moved around a lot, my wife and I. Brownton's only been in the past year. Before that, Miami. Before that, Texas. This cold weather you have in Pittsburgh makes my pecker wither."
Steve nodded sagely. The steak sizzled. "So why are you living here if you don't like the cold?"
We're football fans, specifically Steeler fans. You wouldn't think I'd be, having no foot and all, but I love the sport. I love to run again. You're lucky, Steve. You get to do it for a living. What a charmed life."
Steve Green assumed the guy knew his story. Steve was a Steeltown legend, the local boy who got rich playing football. Just this fall, he signed up for another 2-year contract with the Steelers, and really only kept this house on Golden Gate as a tribute to his past, a sign to the fans that he would never sell out and go Beverly Hills, though he was actually seriously considering a Raiders contract once his 2 years were up. Although he could have cracked a half-dozen smug quotes about getting there on sweat and blood, Steve opted to be respectful to the old guy and nodded a quiet, "Thank you." They sipped beers and looked at the grass, at the sky. Steve admired the man's side profile. Richard had a prodigious cleft chin, similar to Kirk Douglas's. He was probably quite the player in his day. "How did you lose your leg?" Steve asked, genuinely curious.
"In the Cambodian War. That's 1975, in case you're wondering."
Richard ran a hand down to his knee, unconsciously massaging the limb.
"Got this here tattoo there as well."
He rolled up his sleeve to his shoulder and displayed a blue faded pattern. Steve had expected to see some macho skulls or scorpions set on American flags and lightning bolts, but the marking was written in unusual script.
"It's written in Khmer, and it guarantees infinite life."
The old man looked up at him slyly. "Let's hope that's true," Steve smirked, and they clinked cans again in a salute to life. He took the steak off the burner. Medium. He plated it on one of the sunflower plates his wife seemed to have in unending abundance, and handed it to Richard. "Okay, Rick, if she chokes, don't blame the cook. You can keep the plate." The man took his last swallow of beer, set the can aside, and took the plate. He nodded thanks.
You are a scholar and a gentleman.
Feel free to cut through the back, so you don't have to walk the block.
Much obliged. See you around.
With that, he hitched his way off the back porch and wobbled back towards his own home on the other side of the yard. Steve absent-mindedly raised a finger to his mouth, which had got some of the steak's juice spilled on it. He licked off the juice, and immediately thought, delicious! Later that night, Steve was in the study, watching the dolphins feed it to the bills, when he heard a tapping at his back patio door. More curious than alarmed, it took a lot to alarm a big guy like Steve Green. He went to the door, turned on the backlight, and looked down. Old Richard had returned, with the sunflower plate in his hand and a cut of meat on the plate.
Howdy, neighbor,
The old man greeted. He had walked across their back lawn. Steve frowned. Hope this doesn't become a habit. He leaned out into the night air, and, a little less friendly, stated, I said you could keep the plate. Richard nodded, and answered,
You're a good man, Steve, and blessed, too. I wanted to thank you for your kindness.
He held up a plate of the same steak he had this afternoon. It shimmered beguilingly. Your own barbecue's still not working? Steve asked, bemused.
It's not that. I have more than I need. Turns out, as you get older, meat becomes harder to eat. Can you please take this for me and enjoy it? It's spice rubbed to perfection.
He remembered how exquisite the little drop of juice on his finger was. It tempted Steve. Besides, maybe Manna would want her plate back after all. He took the plate and steak from the old man. Its aroma wafted up. Even uncooked, he could tell that it would win awards for deliciousness. He looked up to thank Richard, but the man was already hitching away into the darkness, back to his home. If Steve wasn't so busy staring at the tempting sheen of the meat, he might have noticed fresh blood leaking down the side of the old man's leg stump. Curious to know if the steak was as good as he was hoping, he cooked it on the frying pan. It gave off a thick, cloying aroma, like exotic spices. Cooking it medium rare, he sat down with a plate of salty crackers and a salad. He sliced some and held a fork of it out to the dog, but the dog backed away timidly. Come on, stupid. This is steak. You eat muck in a can. Get this in you quick. He continued to offer the dog some of the steak, but the dog retreated back further and further from the treat, until he was huddled under the far chair of the kitchen table, quivering. Your loss, punk, Steve commented, and tried his first bite of Richard Downs' steak. Later on, he couldn't remember what he thought of it, only the inconsolable sadness he felt upon learning that he had gobbled every piece, and that there was no more. Matt stopped by the next day to take them to practice. They both had badass cars, but Matt really liked to drive his, and did so under any pretense. Where's Manna Banana? She's out of town for the week. Left this morning, Steve said, packing a gear bag, shorts, shirt, jock, drink. His head was a little foggy. He wasn't sure if he slept well last night. So, hookers tonight, yeah? Matt teased. No, your wife can't come over, Steve cracked back, and Matt cackled. But his mind wasn't on the joke, or the upcoming workout session. He thought about the steak. Maybe he should have taken a picture of it, find it on the internet. That won't be necessary, the bad guy always says. It wasn't necessary to search for the steak online. When Matt dropped him off at home, Steve found an icy red cooler propped up on the front steps. The plastic box came with a handwritten note. Dear Steve, this is for you. I thought you'd appreciate these steaks. I've got way too much. Help me eat them? Thanks. Signed by Rick, with a looping scrolling R and a large blot over the I. Steve's heart jumped in hope, and he cracked open the cooler. Inside, in separate vacuum-packed plastic bags, were more steak slices, still warm. Were they fresh from the butcher's? Looking around the neighborhood to see if anyone witnessed him squealing with delight, he snatched up the box of steaks and darted inside his home. He couldn't rip one open fast enough, throw its contents into a frying pan with butter and rough-cut onions. This time, he opted for 2 of them, the first to wolf, the second to savor. The steaks were pink, bloody, freshly slaughtered, and rubbed with a brown powder he suspected was from Africa. Morocco, maybe. The meat smelled heavy, like desert sand and wood, formidable. He paired it with a rich and lusty wine, and finished the bottle and both steaks in minutes. Again, time disappeared, lost in oil smoke rings, swirling away in a red, peppery aroma. Several days after it was dropped off, the red cooler was empty. Steve walked across the lawn. Should have put up that fence. to see the old man. As he walked, his legs felt bulky, swollen, like he was carrying more hams and quads than there was skin enough to hold in. He felt powerful. He rapped on Richard's back door and was greeted with a call from inside.
Come on in.
Inside Richard's home, there were no photos, plants, or anything showing a connection to loved ones or to life in the 21st century. Instead, the place was littered with magic paraphernalia. Moldering books, crystals, star charts, diagrams of malformed creatures, patterns of geocentric circles. Jars and boxes held murky contents which he doubted were food. The place was a straight-up creepy carnival sideshow. Richard appeared in a doorway, sitting in a wheelchair. He had a blanket draped across his lower half, which seemed oddly deficient in the way it sat on his thighs. "Rick, what happened?" Steve asked, concerned. "For the meat."
Oh, my damn cancer's gone aggressive.
Richard squinted, trying to recall.
When's the last time I saw you? Last week?
He nodded to himself.
Yeah, right after your back porch. I fell down in my house. My in-laws got scared and took me to the hospital. Blood clots were forming in my leg bones. I had to go into an emergency surgery, but they couldn't save my leg.
Steve's eyes widened. "Oh, shit. That's horrible. So you're a double amputee now?" Richard laughed.
Yeah, feel free to borrow my golf shoes whenever you want.
Steve closed his eyes and rubbed them, wondering if he was having some kind of trip. He opened them and asked, "You're a senior citizen who just underwent a major amputation. How is it you're out of the hospital so soon?" The old man just shrugged and raised both hands.
Good genetics?
Something was wrong with this whole scene. Steve could tell that much, but a badass monkey was on his back, clawing and clawing, demanding. He stopped trying to figure things out and just gave in. Licking his lips, Steve asked, "Look, Rick, I hate to have to ask you this now, seeing what condition you're in, but would you have any of that steak left by any chance? I'm in spring training, and I'm trying to beef up for this season. It's really helping me pack on the muscle."
The old man nodded. Yeah, cool, big guy. Look in there.
He motioned to his left, pointing at an old freezer smudged with rusty brown stains. It chugged and farted intermittently. Seeing what a creepy place Richard kept, Steve half expected to see horrible things in the depths of the freezer as well. Frozen, congealed blood, and unidentifiable detritus. But the freezer was clean inside and well lit. At its bottom, there were 10 parcels of wrapped steak. "Awesome!" Steve gasped. "How many can I have?"
Help yourself. I'll get another shipment soon.
Wonder overcame his discretion. "Where are you getting this stuff, man?" Richard waved a hand airily.
I know a guy who knows a guy. Jewish butchers, you know. With Yom Kippur just passed, they've got a ton of extra stock. And the way they kosher salt the meat, that's what gives it its flavor. It's the choice cuts.
"Shit, yeah it is. I'll give you money. $20 a steak sound fair?"
I wouldn't hear of it. It would be my pleasure to help the Steelers in any way I can.
Steve turned to the old guy, who probably made a great father to some lucky kid somewhere. "Thanks, old man. I appreciate it. You'll still get my money, though. I'll stuff it in a game ball and give it to you." Judging from the weirdness in this place, you could probably use it, Steve thought.
You just win the games, you big galoot. Your success is my success.
Richard fixed him with an odd stare. Greedy, in a way that Steve couldn't be sure of. Steve loaded his arms with steak and let himself out. He made a steak sandwich, watched the game, and while halftime was yammering in the background, he was seized with a rapturous, vivid vision. He could see a ballroom in a time of antiquity where people wore fur and heavy leather overcoats. Women wore hats with feathers, sometimes whole birds on the rims. He saw Nazi swastikas prominently displayed on the walls. In this vision, which may also have been a dream, but he was sure he was awake for it, he was standing before a crowd of people sitting at elaborate tables, enjoying a fine multi-course meal. It was a celebration of sorts. He was talking to the crowd, speaking German. He was talking about plans. They clapped in adoration, and the pride of that moment brought tears to his eyes.